Right, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to our talk, Can Hedgerows Save the World tonight? I'm Lorraine, I'm from CPRE, and I run a project called Hedgerow Heroes. It's something we've been doing for 5 years now. We're in our fifth year, and we've got 13 CPREs taking part in hedgerow restoration, rejuvenation, and planting up and down the country. This talk is the first in a series of four that we're doing as part of Hedgerow Heroes. So we're really hoping that they can indeed save the world. Um, I'd now like to hand over to Ellie Banks from CPRE Hampshire, who's going to introduce our wonderful speaker, Megan, tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorraine. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of our hedge-centric talk series this winter. This is really brilliant to have you all here. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight. Yeah, we're chuffed to be part of the Hedgerow Heroes campaign, and in Hampshire we're doing lots that we can to bring more hedgerows back into the countryside. So I run the Hampshire Hedge Project, which is one of the many projects going on this winter across the country, run by CPRE branches, as Lorraine says. So yeah, without just going to go through some housekeeping bits, and then I'll be introducing Megan. So we've had Megan talk for us before, and it's brilliant to see so many more people joining to hear more about what Megan's got to say, because it really is, so much information to learn. So I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping bits. So you'll probably have noticed that you're all muted and your videos are off. So we are just going to have any questions or comments going into the chat function, which is at the bottom in the bar. So yeah, we're recording the talk, which is why we wanted to mute everyone. And if you do have your video still on, but you don't want to be part of the recording, do just switch that off. And as I say, we're gonna have some time for some questions at the end. So do hold on to your questions, pop them in the chat at the end, or if you want to write them in sooner, do pop them in. But we're not going to answer questions throughout the talk. So yeah, welcome to our first talk. We've got another talk in January, another in February, and another in March. So this should keep you all busy through the winter. So yeah, welcome Megan. Really looking forward to your talk tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, bear with me whilst I do the embarrassing bit of staring at the screen, trying to get my screen share to work. There we go. So hopefully, Ellie, can you just confirm that you can see a cow with a cape dressed like a hedge?
Yes, I can. And now it's fully shared now. Brilliant.
Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, well, my name's Megan. I am the hedgerow geek for a charity called People's Trust for Endangered Species. And PTES, we're a charity that does endangered species conservation across the world, and we have several focuses also within the UK. And my role at PTES is pretty much exclusively habitat management and hedgerows in particular. And now today's talk is called Can Hedgerows Save the World, which is a little bit of a silly title, but I genuinely think they've got so much more potential than a lot of people realise. Now, I'm setting a bit of a silly tone with this first image. For those of you that can't understand what's going on, quite rightly, this is an AI-generated image. I asked AI to generate me an image of a superhero hedge layer. And unfortunately, they had no idea what that was. So here we've got a cow dressed as a hedge with a superhero cape on. But this is just to signify the impact that we think hedges can have if we choose to manage them and celebrate them in a way that will bring out the best of this fantastic asset of a hedge. So today's talk is going to be in several parts. There is a number 6 as well. I just forgot to write it in there. We're going to look at hedgerows for climate resilience. So how do hedgerows help us basically with climate change, so that we can buffer some of the impact of climate change? We're going to look at hedgerows and carbon. What's the evidence and the options for increasing the carbon sequestration and storage of hedges? What is a climate resilient hedgerow? So how do we design, plant and manage hedges to ensure that they are robust in the face of climate extremes? Then we're going to look at, can hedgerows save wildlife? And this is obviously an area that is yeah, very important to me at a conservation charity. It's how a lot of people come to hedges. And we're going to look at what possibilities hedgerow management and hedgerows themselves can do to help bring about some ecological resilience. And then what do hedges need? So how hedges, what do we need to do to manage hedges, to support hedges, to make sure they can actually fulfill all of these? And number six, well, that might be a surprise, or I might remember what number six is as we're going. So number one, hedges for climate change, for climate resilience. So we are already seeing the impact of climate change. This year in particularly won't have missed the drought, the heat waves that we've had in recent years. So how do we use hedgerows to help future-proof our farming and our food production? Using hedgerows to build climate resilience into our existing systems to ensure the viability of our farming and food growing in the future. So I'm going to start with livestock. So I think it's really important to understand what benefits hedgerows bring to farming already and which of those are going to be more important as climate change ramps up. And I'm going to start with livestock farming because there's several benefits that hedges bring here. So it's likely with climate change that we are going to see the increasing length and increasing severity of heat waves. So establishing more hedges and hedgerow trees now will help future-proof livestock farming in the face of climate change by providing much needed shade. So heat stress obviously takes a huge toll on our livestock, which you will often see crowding into whatever shady area of a field they can find on a hot day. And heat stress itself has a significant impact on the livestock welfare and health and also profitability. So heat stress can reduce milk yield in dairy cows. It will affect fertility, growth rates, and immune function. So again, this is really impacting the viability of our livestock farming. And we can use hedges and hedgerow trees to help buffer some of that. Similarly, climate change is also going to bring us more frequent storms of stronger intensity. And again, hedges can help here because they can provide shelter for our livestock. We know that livestock without shelter have a higher mortality rate and require more food. So building in shelter offers us much more flexibility with our livestock farming systems, whether we want to outwinter our livestock, whether we want to outlamb, whether we're comfortable having our livestock out there with storms. Providing shelter can be the key to livestock flexibility here. Diverse browse, so healthy livestock are more resilient to other climate change challenges. And a diverse diet, which can include hedgerow and tree browse, can play an important part in making sure that livestock remain healthy. Many hedgerow plants contain medicinal properties that can enhance livestock vitality. And we know this, we can see it already. I've stolen this photo from the agroecology website, but it nicely shows the lengths at which a cow will go to get tree and hedge browse. You know, most of our cattle, most of our livestock aren't just grass-eating creatures. They actually do much better when they've got a more diverse diet that can include browse from trees and from hedges. Now, the shelter and the increased warmth adjacent to a hedge means that grass can actually start growing earlier in the year and continue later into the season as well. And so this can actually stretch the grass growing season, offering again more flexibility for livestock management. And it can help buffer some seasonal changes. And this photo here actually shows that in times of sort of heat and drought extremes, hedges can sometimes be the only green things remaining in the landscape. So this photo was actually taken this summer in my usually soggy and green home county of Devon. But unfortunately this year, with our very long drought, it was neither soggy nor green. And as you can see, it's just the hedges and the trees that remained green in here. In fact, it was so bad this year with climate change and with the drought that it's contributed to. I think we had the driest spring on record, and we've just had 3 of the hottest summers on record. Again, farmers, even in my normally green and soggy Devon, had to feed the cows in summer the silage that they had gathered for the winter months. So again, hedges won't be the only answer here, and they're not going to fix this problem, but any resilience that we can build into the system is going to need to be utilised in the face of climate change if we're going to build resilience into our farming. On the arable and horticultural side, again, the impact of shelter means that hedges can provide valuable microclimate regulation. So they moderate temperature, humidity, and evaporation in the fields themselves. So again, with more drought scenarios likely, and with the increasing scarcity of fresh water for irrigation, the creation of humidity layers, to reduce infield evapotranspiration from the soil and from the plants may tip a fine balance in the farmer's favour. Of course, hedges also help support diverse populations of pollinators. Hedges do this by providing both enough pollinator forage, so food, throughout the year to make sure that our pollinators are fed throughout the year rather than just when our crops are in flower, but they also provide somewhere for our pollinators to live. Now, most of our pollinators don't live in cropped land. They'll live in the edges, in the margins, in the hedges. They'll live in the scruffy bits around the edges. And it's really important that we provide that. There's some fantastic research that shows how far into a field pollinators will fly to actually help pollinate that crop. So by economic value, case studies show that 20 to 25% of UK crop production directly depends on insect pollinators. And unfortunately, these are also being impacted by climate change. So again, building resilience into our pollination communities is going to be really important. And just to put a financial value on it, it's estimated that this adds £600 to £700 million per year in added crop value. Hedges can also help us reduce our pesticide use, again, by increasing the food and places for beneficial insects to live. So I don't like the term beneficial insects because I think all insects have their place, obviously. But the term beneficial insects essentially means insects that eat the crop pests, so things like aphids. So we're talking about things like predatory spiders, ground beetles, parasitic wasps, hoverflies, all that sort of thing. They will live in the margins and in the hedges, and they, again, will commute into the field to gobble up aphids before coming back home again. And it was estimated that between 0.4 and 1.2 billion pounds a year is the value of natural pest control. And there was a study that said if we were to lose these natural enemies, these natural beneficial insects, then we would have to increase our pesticide use by about 70%. And of course, that has a major environmental and cost implication. So this is a wonderful graph that I have stolen from the Nature Friendly Farming Network, but it shows, you don't need to read the details on this, but it shows down on that column on the left all the different microhabitats and habitats on a farm. And the ones along the top, that's all of the different beneficial insects that you will find living and breeding there. If you slim this down to just the hedgerows, so this is hedges, flowering field margins, and tusky grass at the edge of a hedge, then you actually get a hugely fantastic coverage of all of those predatory and parasitic insects that will help gobble up the crop pests. We will see increased storm intensity and rainfall with climate change. In fact, we're already seeing the damage that can do across Europe and across the UK. And it's actually especially bad when dry periods are followed swiftly by periods of intense rainfall. Dry soil is hydrophobic, which means it doesn't readily absorb water. And this means water can flash flow, taking layers of soil with it. Now, hedges alone aren't going to fix this. The scale of the problem is quite severe now, but they can be part of the solution. And again, gathering all of these parts together will be really important when it comes to buffering against climate change. So hedges can do this in a couple of ways. They help water infiltrate into the soil through two ways, really. By the quality of the soil itself, so hedgerow soil has larger aggregates and actually massively increases the rate at which water is absorbed into it. But also the roots of the hedges create a pathway for the water to trickle down. And of course, hedgerows have deeper roots than most of our grass or our crop species. And that means a deeper part of our soil profile is able to act as a sponge to soak up this water. And of course, soaking up water really, really helps just slow the flow of water in times of heavy rainfall. And any slowing down of that water flow will reduce the amount of soil that is washed away and washed into our streams and our rivers. And this, of course, has really important pollution implications as well. So the second part of my talk, hedgerows and carbon. So what can hedgerows directly do to sequester and store carbon in our fight against climate change? Now, there is a growing interest in the potential for farmed habitats to contribute to carbon sequestration, and hedges are gaining increasing interest. I would say key to understanding how much hedges carbon can store is understanding where they store the carbon and under what conditions or what management systems. Now, this is an area of active research and we do not have all the data yet, but what we do have is looking really promising. So what we know is hedges sequester carbon in many different ways. In the hedgerow standard trees, in the above ground structure, so the actual hedge dense sort of scrubby bit, in the roots, and in the soils below and around them. So understanding these elements separately helps us understand the opportunities to increase carbon storage in existing hedges. Now we've got over 400,000 miles of existing hedge, so that's quite impressive. But understanding these elements together also gives the scale of carbon sequestration available to us by embracing new hedgerows as part of our agricultural systems, and the value of planting new ones as well. So there's been a fantastic paper recently that came out of Germany by someone called Sophie Drexler, and she demonstrated that the carbon stock in mature hedges was larger than that of your average forest per hectare. Old hedges store more carbon than forest per bit of land. Now, this is absolutely groundbreaking. And this might come as something of a surprise. You know, when we think of a forest, you think of tree trunks, you think of branches, you can see all of that carbon. But when you break down the total hedgerow carbon stock, a much larger proportion of this is out of sight, stashed underground. Now, on this diagram, the left-hand illustration is of a hedgerow. So less, and the middle one is of a forest. So hedgerows have less above ground biomass, so you don't see the carbon, but they've got much more in their roots and much, much more in the soil carbon below and around them. And breaking this down into the hedge's constituent parts, I think it's the column at the end, which I think is probably the most exciting. And this is the bit that represents the soil carbon. And strikingly, there's loads more carbon stored in the roots and soil than we ever realised before. And this, I say, comes as a bit of a warning and a bit of an opportunity. An opportunity because it means we've got more to gain by planting hedges than we ever realised, and that's fantastic. It means we should absolutely be planting hedges and know that it's going to be contributing to carbon storage and sequestration. But I would say it also comes as a warning because we also have data that shows that this carbon, this enormous amount of carbon stored underground in a hedge, is re-released to the atmosphere if that hedge is lost. Now, this data is consistent with other studies. So in England, Sophia Biffy and Pippa Chapman demonstrated that soil carbon below and around hedges ultimately reaches a point where it stores 40 tonnes per hectare more than adjacent grassland. And this is a 40% increase in total storage of carbon. And this carbon doesn't come there overnight. And this is why the old hedges bit is important. It can take up to about 50 years to reach their soil carbon storage capacity. So excitingly, I think this shows that we have historically underestimated hedges for their carbon value. And I'm really hoping that this study demonstrates their value towards this and hopefully gives them a little bit more attention and funding going forward, because we know that these are going to be very, very important assets in our fight against climate change. So perhaps because ironically, this next section, I'm going to be looking at how we think we can increase the carbon in existing hedges. Um, so ironically, because we need to periodically cut hedges down to keep them alive, there's actually a limited amount of additional carbon we can sequester in existing hedges. But allowing hedges to be bigger on average as part of their life cycle will add to their average above ground biomass. We can also increase the above ground carbon stored by gapping up existing hedges. So hedges like this are just crying out to be gapped up, to be restored, so that they can be doing more carbon storage as well as all of the other things they do. Now, gapping up is adding to the habitat, it's adding to the carbon storage extent, and it's not taking any further land out of production. So absolutely beneficial. And if we can utilize the material we get when we manage our hedges, it means this carbon doesn't need to be immediately re-released, or perhaps it can mitigate other emissions through its utility. So next up, for increasing carbon within existing hedges, we can establish more hedgerow trees where that is ecologically appropriate. So in Sophie's study, there was a tree every 40 to 60 meters, and that equated to 6.8% of the total carbon in the hedge. Now, we think that actually, to be in favourable condition, hedgerows should have a tree every 20 to 50 meters. And that means we can again just be adding to the total amount of carbon a hedge stores just by adding some more of these features, some more of these hedgerow trees. Now, just to be extra clear, when I'm talking about adding trees to hedges, I'm talking about adding standard trees that are a separate layer above the canopy of the hedge itself, not letting the hedge itself grow into a tree line. Now, hedgerow trees are just fantastic. They don't just store more carbon, but they actually can improve the hedge functioning too. So done well, hedgerow trees can improve the hedgerow habitat. Over half the priority species that live in a hedge need hedgerow trees to be there. They can improve the on-farm functioning of hedgerows too. So a strategic placement of hedge trees can increase shade, they can increase shelter, they can do all sorts of stuff that can benefit the farming systems when well thought through. They can also buffer the impact of the hedge management below. So when a hedge is trimmed, we often trim off quite a lot of the flowering and berry potential of a hedge. But of course, if you've got a nice diverse suite of hedgerow trees above, they are going to be unaffected by the flail, and they are going to merrily flower and fruit every year regardless. So again, offers that wonderful buffer for wildlife and makes sure that there's fruit and there's flowers every year regardless of management. So hedgerow trees also complement the hedge with a more stable and long-term carbon storage. Again, hedgerow trees are more stable because we keep hedgerow trees even when we manage the hedge below through laying or through coppicing or through trimming. And the more trees, I would say, that we can cram into a productive farming system, the less farmland we may have to remove from food production in order to meet our carbon and biodiversity targets. So for me, leaving suitable stems standing when a hedge is laid or coppiced is my favourite way of establishing new hedgerow trees. There's no need to climb into a thorny hedge with a sapling, a plastic tube and a spade. If we leave suitable stems standing when we lay a hedge, as shown in this picture here, they're already rooted, they're already established, they often have a great structure already, and we've also got the added benefit of preserving the genetic diversity present in your hedge. And we can plan where these new hedgerow trees go so that they can have maximum benefit and minimum disruption to farming. Now, a diversity of hedgerow trees is best for wildlife, and a different tree species also provide flexibility for us because it means we can choose what size, what shape, what structure of tree would actually be beneficial in different places. So, for example, if we wanted to increase the shade in a field, we might plant a large hedgerow tree, an oak or, or a beech or, one of those whopping great big ones in our east to west hedges. And that means predominantly their shade will be cast on the hedge to the north of it. If we don't want infield shade, then we can choose a different tree, maybe a damson or a rowan or even just a hawthorn tree. And that's not going to cast too much shade into the field above. So by strategically placing our trees, we can actually create a landscape that is supporting biodiversity, that is storing more carbon and is also benefiting our farms. And of course, last but not least, we can also store more carbon in our hedges by establishing new hedges. So designing a new hedge, I would say, is a massive opportunity. Every hedge planted, we can think of its primary purpose, and we can design a planting mix, a location, and a management plan to suit us and to suit our modern needs. So this might be hill contour planting for hydrological impact. It might be habitat connectivity if wildlife is our main reason for planting hedges. We might design hedges which are suitable for simple coppicing or laying rotations if firewood is going to be a priority. Or we can have ones that are more suited to trimming management as well. We basically have the opportunity to design a wonderful new set of hedges when we're planting that actually suits our modern farming, suits our modern priorities, whether that be climate change mitigation, whether that be wildlife, or whether that be farm. So in England, the government has actually set a target of 45,000 miles of hedge to be planted or restored by 2050. Now, this is in the Environment Improvement Plan, which we had a rehash of a week or so ago. Now, the main drivers of this target are the national concerns for carbon and biodiversity. But it will actually be farmers designing these hedges, farmers planting them, farmers working out where they're going to go and what's going to go in them. So I think it's really important to take a moment and work out the main drivers for these hedges and designing our hedges so that they can be the best they can be. And luckily for us, it looks like the highest annual rates of carbon biomass sequestration, so the amount of carbon that they're storing, actually happens when a hedge is quite young. So there's a huge amount to be gained in the first decade or so of a hedge's life. So if we get cracking on this 45,000 miles of hedge, there's actually a huge amount of carbon storage potential there. So number 3 of my talk, what is a climate resilient hedgerow? How do we design and establish hedges that are robust in the face of climate extremes? Now, first of all, I would say for me, a species-rich hedgerow is always sensible. I would say a careful balance of suitable species that complement the hedge's prime purpose and location. So species-rich hedges are just fantastic, and everywhere you find them, they are just glorious things. They offer more for wildlife. Every species in a hedge will flower and fruit at a slightly different time of the year, which means together they're actually flowering and fruiting for a greater proportion of the year. They cater to a wider range of specialist species as well. So every woody plant that we've got in this country will have some insects that specialize just on feeding on it. So the more woody species we have in each hedge, the more specialists that hedge can play home to. They can also provide a bit of a backup plan when one species has an off year. Maybe when we get a storm, when something's in blossom, it's not going to get pollinated quite so well, and it might not provide so much fruit. But actually, again, having this wonderful mix of species means that you've got a bit of a buffer there. But I think also crucially, they're going to be more resilient to climate change and more resilient to new pests and diseases. Similarly to the need for species diversity, I think we're also going to need to consider the genetic diversity of our hedges and how we can ensure that the opportunity to reflect the diverse populations of any area, region, or country. Now, genetic diversity is one of the key defenses of any tree species against the variable and changing environments around them. So we're going to need to absolutely make sure that we have a genetically diverse set of hedges when we come to planting and establishing the ones that we've got. So how do we achieve this? Are our seed collection and nursery industries currently providing diverse enough stock? Or what can we do to be improving that? How do we ensure that as we roll out this wonderfully huge planting ambition, that we're doing it in a way that reflects the genetic diversity of our native tree species? Now, perhaps one way we can be increasing this is to think of new approaches to establishing hedges. So currently, all hedges planted in England under the government grants are planted with 2-year-old whips, planted in a double staggered row, 40 centimetres apart, with whips from nurseries. And whilst this does give us some consistency, it also means we're just about to establish 45,000 miles of quite uniform hedge. So what are the opportunities for expanding the scope and flexibility of this? Now, recently, the Tree Council conducted a study looking at different approaches to hedge creation, including direct seeding into prepared soil. And impressively, hedges seeded just 5 centimeters below the soil surface resulted in hedges with 65 plants per square metre and costing just 40% of what it would normally cost to do it with whips. Now, this was a small study and it does need replicating and expanding, but I think it shows great promise that we actually have a number of other opportunities open to us to establish this hedge network. Because 2050 sounds like a very long time away, but I'm pretty sure it's going to roll around quite quickly. And unfortunately, it's looking like having many approaches to hedge establishment might be our best bet. Again, we've just had the driest spring on record in England. We saw vast amounts of young planted hedges die off entirely, pretty much cooked in their poor little spiral tubes. Next up, we also need to make sure that we've got the skills and the knowledge to raise these new hedges to establishment. So here we have two images of two different hedges about the same age. Both of these hedges are about 12 years old. One is established in what I think is the best way to raise a new hedge, and the other was established in what I think, unfortunately, is currently our most common way of raising a new hedge. One is obviously already providing for climate, biodiversity, and farming. It's robust and thick, and it looks absolutely glorious. And the other clearly is not. Hedge management isn't always intuitive. Alongside greater ambition for planting, we actually need greater education on how these incredible assets are best managed. Next up, we are going to look at whether hedgerows can save wildlife. And this, again, is where I think it gets really very interesting. So unfortunately, we are in a bit of a pickle when it comes to our biodiversity decline as well. You don't need to read the writing on this chart. In fact, it's, to be honest, a little bit of a depressing slide, so I'll move on quite quickly. But it is important to know that we are in a biodiversity crisis. And unfortunately, quite a lot of our rare species have become even rarer and now, threatened by extinction. And we're also now seeing the decline in some of our more common species. Which is of serious concern. And report after report show that these numbers aren't yet improving. And I think hedges are a really good place to start to actually get biodiversity back on track. 75% of the land mass of this country is farmed land. So I think it's incredibly important that when we're farming, we do it in a way that farming and wildlife can work together. And hedgerows, to me, are one of those fantastic examples where hedgerows benefit wildlife and benefit farming. And it's, to me, this is low-hanging fruit for creating a better biodiversity future for us. So this graph is from the British Trust for Ornithology. And unfortunately, it shows the downhill trend for farmland bird indicator species between 1970 and 2021. So you can see a huge decline in farmland birds. Now, 84% of birds represented by this graph depend on hedges in one way or another. So again, whilst hedges isn't the reason for these declines, the declines shown by this graph are often complex and have multiple different contributing factors. We do know that a huge proportion of our birds rely on hedgerow habitats. So making sure that we're providing the right structures for them, managing them in a way that fruit and provide the food that they need, is going to be really very important. So on a more optimistic note, I would say just by tweaking the management of our existing hedges, we have a potential to see quite rapid change with little to no encroachment on the land area that feeds us. Again, we've got over 400,000 kilometres of hedge. So actually the infrastructure is there to start turning this around. We just need to make sure that we manage our hedges in a way that actually can support this change. So hedges, how good are they for wildlife? And this is a question that I love to ask because I don't think we've got the answer. The closest I think we've ever come to finding how well hedges support wildlife was a study done by Robert Walton, who is an absolute legend in the hedgerow world, a fantastic, fantastic hedgerow brain. He studied one hedge on his farm, just one hedge on his farm in Devon, and he found 2,070 different species living in 85 meters of hedge. 2,070 different species. Now that's comparable to ancient woodland. This is amongst the richest of our wildlife habitats. And Robert believes that this already mind-blowing figure is an underestimate of the true number, which he thinks is closer to 3,000. Only he couldn't identify everything that he found. To be honest, I can't even imagine being able to identify 2,070 different species. But it's incredibly rich habitat when we manage them to support that. And I think understanding how they support wildlife is really important because it gives us some clues into how we can manage our hedges and what we need to do to bring out this potential. So how hedges support wildlife? I would say there's three main ways that they do it. Number one, they're a physical home. Things will physically live in a hedge. They'll breed in a hedge, they'll nest in a hedge, they'll overwinter in a hedge, they will sleep in a hedge, roost in a hedge. Things will physically live there. Number two, this is a bit of a cheat, to be honest. It's a complementary habitat. So this is everything from food to shelter. Basically, lots of species don't live in a hedge, but they still use the hedge, whether that be to hunt. So this is a picture of a barn owl. And this barn owl flies up and down the hedge in my orchards over the summers, feasting on all of the small mammals it can get from the hedge. It also loves to fly up and down hedgerows because on the leeward side, when it's windy, that's actually where they can get the shelter that they can hear. So they can hear their prey. But if it's too windy and they don't have any shelter, then actually they're not able to hunt. And the third way that hedges support wildlife is as wildlife corridors. This, I think, is one that everyone's quite familiar with this concept. Hedges basically help things move from A to B, from woodland to woodland, or from heathland to heathland. Hedges connect up other habitat across the country. They connect up other populations of animals. They make sure that things don't get isolated because we know when a population gets isolated, it's much more vulnerable. And they make sure that with the best will in the world, what we do in the center of a field is fairly inhospitable to most of our wildlife. So most of our wildlife will much rather cross the country, cross the landscape through the edges, the margins, the hedges. And this is true for things that fly, not just things like dormice, but things that fly as well. So I've got a picture of a butterfly here because it just reminds me to mention even things with neat wings need the connectivity that hedges provide. So for butterflies, it's really important because it provides, again, the shelter. So they will sit on the leeward or the sunny side of a hedge. They will gain the body temperature that they need to actually fly across the countryside. And they'll fly along hedges where they've got a bit of shelter, so they're not buffeted about by the wind so much. Now, loads of animals might use, or loads of species might use a hedge for one of those elements, home, food and shelter, or connectivity, but loads of things actually use it for all three of those. Bats is a really good example. Bats need three things to thrive in a habitat. They need a roosting site, they need a safe commute, and they need insects to feed on. And hedges, by and large, can provide all of those for many of our bat species. Hedgehogs. Hedgehogs will hibernate at the base of a hedge. They will roost or nest at the base of a hedge in the summer as well. They will feed on insects and macroinvertebrates in the margins of a hedge. And they will also use it for connectivity because they like to bimble along linear features where they feel a bit safer and they can dart for cover if they need to. Dormice, again, use hedges for all three of those elements. Now, we normally think of dormice as coppice woodland species, but they are perfectly happy to live in a hedgerow as long as our hedgerows are good enough. To be good enough for a dormouse, they need to be quite good because dormice are fairly fussy little creatures. To be good enough for a dormouse, a hedgerow needs to have many different species in it because a dormouse changes what it eats throughout the year. And it needs to be managed in a way that actually it will flower and fruit and provide spaces for it to build its breeding nests and its hibernation nests. And of course, hedges, are the way that dormice get from one woodland to another. Dormice are what we call arboreal creatures. They don't really like scampering across the ground. In fact, if you've ever seen a dormouse scampering across the ground, it looks very uncomfortable. It sort of walks a little bit like a penguin in a way. Whereas when they're on branches, they just zoom along. And actually, so it's things like hedgerows and lines of woody material that connect up populations in different habitats. And this is going to be, again, really important with climate change to help make sure that our dormice can migrate. And as and when we're planting new woodlands and more woodlands become available or suitable habitat for them, that hedges and linking everything up through our hedgerow network actually allows them to move around the countryside and to get to that wonderful new habitat. Now, hedges are a man-made habitat, or I should say man-shaped habitat. So it's actually quite surprising that they are this good for wildlife. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of an ecological history deep dive here. Bear with me. I think it's fascinating. I hope you do too. How are hedges this good for wildlife? It turns out their secret is in the structure. So their structure has elements of woodland with their hedgerow trees, flowering scrub, and elements of pasture. And this means that a hedgerow is able to support species that would normally live in woodland, flowering scrub, or pasture. It also means that together they can support species that need elements of all of these habitats. So some species, believe it or not, need trees, scrub, and pasture in order to fulfill their life cycles. And actually, the closer you look at our native ecology, the more and more and more you'll find that actually really thrive in this wonderful combination of features. Now, we call this a woodland edge ecotone. So an ecotone is where sort of habitats overlap or blend into each other. And this particular combination reflects the habitat that you find at a woodland edge. And of course, if you're going to look for biodiversity in a woodland, anyone that will do that regularly will know the hotspots are actually in the glades, in the rides, and at the edges of woodland, where you get this structure represented as well. Now, again, the closer you look at our ecology, the more species thrive in this combination, which seems rather bizarre, really, when you think about it, until you realise this is a very similar combination of features to what we think our pre-agricultural wildwood will have looked like. So it wasn't all closed canopy woodland. There's actually now plenty of evidence to suggest that we had a mosaic of more successionary habitat that changed, habitat that was a bit more open, that was influenced by megafauna, big herbivores that migrated around the countryside. And it was a dynamic landscape. It was constantly in motion through the grazing and the browsing and the crunching of large herbivores. So there would have been scattered trees. There would have been flowering and fruiting scrub that would be browsed back. Then it would encroach again as the herbivores left. There would be open areas with a browsed and a grazed pasture. So unlike now, where we've got a woodland and then maybe a fence and then a field, actually our pre-agricultural wildwoods would have been much more blended together, so much more of this woodland edge ecotone. And if you think of it in those terms, it actually makes a lot more sense that if this is what our ecology adapted to, that might be why the habitats that we call them cultural habitats, man-made habitats that recreate this structure are so rich in wildlife as well. So for hedges, we've just taken that habitat and squeezed it into narrow little corridors and made them, a part of our working farmed landscape. But we also find this wonderful structure, these open grown trees, flowering and fruiting scrub and grazed pasture in places like traditional orchards or wood pasture, or to an extent, coppice woodlands with the dynamism. And again, these are some of our most species-rich habitats, even though they are often referred to as man-made habitats. So when it comes to our hedges, again, we're reflecting that wonderful structure, but we've lost some of that spatial dynamism. We don't allow our hedges to encroach into the fields anymore. I am a bit of a glutton. I like at least 3 hot meals a day. So we do need to be farming what's inside the fields. So we need to make sure that we keep this dynamic structure, this wonderful change and succession by managing our hedges on a life cycle. So making sure we provide that dynamism through time rather than only through space. Now, conveniently, this is not a new harebrained idea of mine. This is actually how we've always managed hedges. Pretty much for as long as we've had hedges, we have been managing them according to a rough life cycle. And that's very largely that we allow them to go through their wonderful succession. And once they mature out of what I call the Goldilocks zone, or the sort of the peak succession, once they mature out of that, then we reset them through laying or through coppicing and basically force them to go through that succession again. And this creates that wonderful dynamic habitat with this fantastic structure again and again and again, and keeps them healthy and good. So that's given a bit of an insight, but I'm gonna hone down on what we think good hedge management looks like. What do hedges need from us in order to provide all the benefits that I've just been talking about? And this comes to how we manage them. The management that we give to a hedge is the difference between a fantastic hedge for wildlife and for climate and one that's not really providing very much. So if you overmanage your hedges, they might start to look like this one on the left. But if you undermanage your hedges, they run up, turn into a line of trees, and then slowly die over time, like this one on the right. Now, over time, and without a change of management, both of these routes lead to hedgerow decline and ultimately loss. So what's the right balance then? If undermanagement and if overmanagement both lead to hedgerow decline and both lead to hedgerow loss, what do we do? And again, it comes back to this idea of resetting a hedge and forcing it to go through its succession. Hedges are at their absolute peak when they're dynamic, when they're changing, when they're going through those wonderful succession cycles. And with hedges, that means traditionally that's a management cycle or a laying cycle. So we lay them and allow them to go through this wonderful change and dynamism again. And this is basically how we get to keep them forever. This is how we've always done them. We managed them on a life cycle, we laid them, we let them go through succession, and then we laid them again. Unfortunately, understandable changes to the way we farm post-war meant that we've largely broken with the tradition of hedge laying. And without hedge laying or coppicing, unfortunately, too many of our hedges have fallen either into the trap of repeated trimming, and they've turned into hedges like we can see on the left, or have turned into tree lines that we see on the right without any trimming at all. So this is what the traditional life cycle of a hedge should and can look like, and that's laying it. It may have some trimming, it may not do, letting it up, and then laying it again. And that's as simple as hedge management needs to be. And the laying element, I think, is the bit that we need to focus on. Because again, undermanagement and overmanagement, I would say, are symptomatic of not laying hedges. And as soon as we get back to laying hedges, actually our hedges will be an awful lot more resilient and be in much better shape. And hopefully I'll explain to you how and why that works. So pretty much no matter how well you manage your hedge, it will need laying at some point. Or potentially coppicing, but my preference is for laying. And essentially it resets the life cycle. It thickens a hedge back up from the bottom and allows a hedge to go through that process again. So this photo shows a recently and beautifully laid hedge. It wasn't one of mine. I never lay a hedge that tidy. And hedge laying essentially is where every single stem of a hedge is cut right at the bottom, about 80% of the way through, and then the top bit is folded over and bound somehow. Now, this bit stays alive because it's still attached to the roots. So it stays alive. And what happens is it regrows. And because you've got loads of horizontal or diagonal pleatures and the regrowth grows up through, it knits it together and creates this fantastic, dense, wonderful habitat. But actually, the absolute gold dust that you get when you lay a hedge is actually the bit that you get where you make that cut. So you cut it at the bottom, flop it over, and it's the regrowth that you get from that cut stall that's the absolute joy. So that is what's going to represent the next generation of your hedge. So cut that one down, more grows up. This is going to be the next generation of hedge. And in 30 or 40 years' time, that's what you cut and fold over, and so on, so on and so forth. And when we rejuvenate our hedges in this way, it actually gives our hedges a new generation, a new flush of life. So this on the left is that cut that we make at the bottom of a hedge, and you can see it's gone almost all the way through, but the top bit is hanging on by an absolute thread. That's all it needs to stay alive. And on the right, that is several stems growing from the cut stall of a hedge that was laid in the previous year. And you can see from one stem, you get many, many more stems of regrowth. And this is providing the next flush of life that comes through. And so essentially, the way I see it, hedge laying is sort of akin to the pulse of a hedge. Every time we lay a hedge, we give it a new pulse of regrowth right from the bottom. We give it another generation. And this is how we've always managed hedges. And this is how we've still got ancient hedges. We have hedges that are thousands of years old in this country. And the only reason we've kept them is because once per generation, we lay them and give them that new flush of life. Unfortunately, what went wrong was the wars. So after the wars, we had an awful lot less labour working on the land. We don't have nearly as many farm people working in farming as we used to do pre-war. Now, pre-war, laying hedges was absolutely the normal thing. Everyone went out hedging and ditching every winter. It was just part of farming. But unfortunately, changes, large changes to farming, as in the rest of society, meant that after the war, that wasn't possible. We didn't have enough labour on the land to do this management practice. So we basically just stopped. And now it's been so long without this new pulse of life that our hedges are really struggling. So when you see hedges that are in poor condition, it might not necessarily be the management that we've been doing to it, but the management that we've stopped doing to it that we can blame for the reason that they're in this poor shape. So the only feasible way to secure our existing hedges, we've got 400,000 kilometres of hedge, and the only way we can secure them is getting back to this rejuvenation. The only way we can make sure that they've got another generation to live is by forcing them into it through laying or through coppicing to really, really rejuvenate them and give them that new flush of life. So this is another silly image, I'm afraid. With billhooks and chainsaws, hedge layers, I see hedge layers as superheroes myself. With billhooks and chainsaws, hedge layers wield the power of immortality. They turn what is otherwise, a set of trees and bushes with a limited life cycle and a life expectancy into something that can conceivably live forever. And I struggle to think of any superhero power more impressive than the power of immortality. So this is what the hedge laying cycle we think can look like, and this is how we think hedges should be managed and can be managed to bring out their potential, to bring out their best. This is actually an illustration based on the Adams Code, and the Adams Code is a fantastic method of classifying hedges created by Nigel Adams that shows different stages of a hedgerow's life cycle. The laying bit is the bit that we need to be getting back to, but unfortunately the laying bit is also quite expensive. When we had labour on the land, on the farms to do this all in-house, it was all done in-house. But unfortunately, when we stopped hedge laying, when we didn't have enough labour to do it in house, there are professional hedge layers, but it's a very expensive thing to do. Anyone on the call that has done any hedge laying, that's laid any hedges yourself, you will know that it takes blood, sweat, and tears. It's a hefty thing to do, and unfortunately, because it takes so much time, it is quite an expensive thing to do. So one of the things that we can do to slow down how frequently we need to lay our hedges is to actually use some trimming. And now I think it's important to recognise that trimming can be a very healthy part of a hedge's management cycle. Trimming can create density within a hedge, create branching density, and actually can in some ways mimic the browsing of animals. So most of the plants within our hedge co-evolved with browsing animals, and so responds to browsing by putting on more branching density. But when we utilize trimming within our hedges, we can actually slow down this life cycle. I mean, we don't have to do that expensive bit of laying so frequently. So if we are going to trim our hedges, which is a very sensible thing to be doing, we need to know how we can do it in a way that both doesn't damage the hedgerow structure, but also can support diversity and wildlife at the same time. And to me, there's two ways of doing that. So when we trim our hedges every year to the same height, that's largely when hedges start to struggle. And to me, that gives us two really good options of doing something a bit different. So number one is not trimming them every year. So this is a set of images from Martin Lyons at the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and it shows the difference in hedge blossom on a 3-year trimming cycle. So this is just trimming every 3rd year rather than every year. And you can see that image on the right. It's absolutely blooming with hawthorn blossom. And this is largely because most of the woody species within our hedges only flower on 2nd-year wood. So only young wood, 2nd-year wood and older, which means if we trim our hedges every year and we trim them right back in, we're trimming off all of the flowering potential. So again, trimming them on a relaxed trimming cycle, so 2, 3, or even more years, actually makes sure that we provide wood of the age structure that will flower and then fruit. And of course, we need the flowers if we're going to want to get some hedgerow fruits. This is actually the same hedge, 2 photos of the same hedge. One part, which is on a relaxed trimming cycle, I think it's on a 5-year trim. And on the right-hand side, that is the section of the hedge that gets annually trimmed to the same height. And you can see, I looked for ages and I couldn't see a single berry on that right-hand side. So the other option for trimming our hedges is just not trimming them at the same height. So either not trimming them every year or not trimming them at the same height. We can actually trim them slightly higher and slightly wider, slightly higher and slightly wider each year. And that does a number of things. We call this incremental trimming, and it's a really good management approach. It does a number of things for our hedges. Number one, it allows our hedges to get bigger. And that's fantastic because slightly bigger hedges provide more habitat for wildlife. And it's also a nod to the idea that we're allowing our hedges to change. And again, hedges thrive. Hedges show their magic and their true colours when they're allowed to change, when they're allowed to develop, when they're allowed to go through their succession. And this helps them do that. But it also means we've always got a band of young wood around the outside of our hedge every single year, which means we've always got wood of a type that will flower and fruit. Now, this is an example of a hedge that's flailed every year, but it's just cut higher and wider each time. So again, we've got that wonderful flowering and fruiting around the edge of our hedge each year. This is what's possible with a slight tweak to the way that we're managing our hedges. So this is what hedge management, we think hedge management can look like. Unfortunately, as I said, the important bit at the top, the rejuvenation to reset our hedges, largely hasn't been done for quite a few years. And unfortunately, that means we've actually now got quite a few hedges that have run up into tree lines and quite a few hedges that have been trimmed so much that they are now getting gappy and a little bit knackered. And again, this is based on the Nigel Adams scale. And what I love about this scale and about this illustration is that it shows some hope and some optimism. It pretty much doesn't matter where your hedge is on this scale. There is a garish pink box and purple arrow that will tell you what you can do to get that back into the healthy cycle. And this is going to be what we are going to have to do. Unfortunately, the statistics for the health of our hedges nationally aren't fantastic. We've got too many hedges that are flung out of the hedge cycle to the left and to the right flanks, like on this image. And it means the scale of what we've got to do to get them, to recover them, to get them back into that lovely, dense and thick hedge cycle represented in the middle is going to be quite extreme. But we know it can be done, and we know that we can recover and we can restore these hedges through the management that we give them. We just need to look at them slightly differently. We need to understand where each hedge is on this management cycle and manage it according to that. So to sum up hedge management in a nutshell, hedge management needs two different things. It needs rejuvenation, and that's once per generation. And it needs routine management in the years in between. So the rejuvenation, this is hedge laying and coppicing. We need to do that once per generation to offer a hedge that new generation, that new flush of growth. This is a non-negotiable if we want to keep our hedges. And in between years, in the in-between years, that's what we do with the routine management. Now, this can be incremental trimming, this can be rotational trimming, or it can be no trimming at all. We do not have to trim our hedges if we don't want to. If we've got a hedge that's on a really steep slope, or that's down by a river, or, you know, that's up in the highlands, or it's in a really muddy patch, we can just have that on a laying cycle or a coppicing cycle. We don't need to trim them. But I think understanding the compromises and the different flexibilities of this system is really helpful. If we've got a hedge on a laying cycle or a coppice cycle, we might need to lay or coppice that every 20, 25 years. If we use trimming, incremental or rotational trimming, we can actually extend that life cycle up to about 40 years. So it might be every 40 years that we need to lay our hedges. And I think this is wonderful because it gives us so much flexibility. As long as you're picking one thing from the left-hand column, you can pick any number from the right. It can be a bit of a pick and mix. Your hedges will be absolutely fine. But we've got the tools that can create really healthy, structured hedges of many different types, many different structures, shapes, sizes. And that means we've got the flexibility to create a landscape of hedges that really suit wildlife and that also really suit our farming. Diversity loves diversity. And when we start managing our hedges on a life cycle, it means we've got that diversity. We'll always have some that have just been rejuvenated and are really tiny, some that are trimmed and dense and thick, some that have got a little bit bigger, and some that have got, you know, wild and unmanageable. And that is what wildlife really responds to. It's also how we get to keep our hedges. That's what we need to be reverting to if we want to keep our existing hedges. So this is just a nice picture of a hedge, really. I just wanted to sort of have a bit of a think about what it is that we need to be doing to make sure our hedges are well supported. And I'm generally optimistic about the future of hedges, but I do think there are a few more things that we need to make sure that we've got for them. Number one, I would say financial support for hedge laying. Hedges are providing public benefit through their carbon sequestration, their carbon storage, and of course their biodiversity power. And I think it's right that agri-environment schemes, government schemes, actually contribute to the rejuvenation of our hedges. Rejuvenation can't happen by and large at a national scale without this support, and unfortunately we will lose hedges without it. So I think we need to make sure that there is that financial support there for our hedges. We also need stability. Whilst the actual grant rates for this work aren't bad, in England at least, over the last few years, we've had a little bit of turbulence with the agri-environment schemes that support this conservation work. And there's been many changes to the way those schemes support hedges. And hedges are a long-term game. Getting hedges big, I would say, is the easy bit. But farmers can't do that without feeling like they're secure that there will be support to do the difficult and expensive bit 15 years down the line. So I think we do need to make sure that we've got a government that is demonstrating their commitment to hedges. We also need more hedge layers. We don't have nearly enough hedge layers in the world, because we've got 400,000 kilometers of hedge, and many of them now need rejuvenation and restoration. And at the moment, we don't have enough people with the skills to do it. So we need to be making sure that we're upskilling people and teaching them how to do this wonderful craft and this wonderful essential skill to make sure that we've got enough people to get this done. And I'd say we also need more understanding of the hedge cycle and the hedge management needs at a farming level, amongst the general public, and also at the level of policy. It's understandable that a lot of this information has been dropped from public knowledge because it's been about 70 years since hedges were managed like this routinely. That's more than a generation. So an awful lot of this knowledge has been lost, and we need to make sure that we're sharing this and celebrating hedges and what they can be doing. So to conclude, before we get to questions, I would just want to say that to me, it's quite clear that hedges have the capacity to provide rapid and meaningful progress towards two of the biggest issues of our time, and that is biodiversity decline and climate change. As a happy byproduct, they can also help future-proof our farming. And again, as someone that likes to eat at least 3 hot meals a day, I'm very, very happy that they help with a productive food creation system. And they also help buffer farming from the impacts that climate change will bring. So to my mind, I would say this already warrants the attention and the funding needed to zoom them to the top of our collective priority lists. I'm also optimistic, because we are collectively waking up to the extensive benefits of healthy hedges. And I think there are some interesting things coming our way. Again, we've got this fantastic promise of 45,000 miles of new and restored hedge. We've got schemes encouraging good management that will improve hedges as a home, a food source, and for connectivity for wildlife. And there's better and more accessible advice able to help at every single level. We've got 400,000 kilometres of hedge nationally. We're going to be planting lots more. But by tweaking the way we manage even just what we've already got, we have the potential to see some rapid and impressive change. Largely, I would say the infrastructure is already there. We just need to make the most of it. We need to turn it back into the ecological dynamite that we know it can be. We know that every hedge has the capacity to support over 2,000 species, and we know how to get it there. We just need to make sure that this becomes one of our top priorities. Thank you. And I forgot to answer the question, can hedgerows save the world? I would say yes, if we allow them to be what we know they can be.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Megan. Yeah, that was so fascinating. It was such a brilliant reframing of all your hedgerow talks I've seen before, with that thinking about hedgerows as this this tool that we can use, one of many tools, but such a brilliant, powerful tool.
It's like a Swiss Army knife. There's nothing it can't do, really.
Yeah, that was really lovely. Thank you very much. And I really want to see a hazel dormouse walking like a penguin now.
They're so clumsy on the ground. It's very sweet.
I really want to see that. I can only just begin to imagine it. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know I continue to learn so much from you. So thank you very much. Brilliant. So now we have some time for some questions. I encourage anyone who has any thoughts and questions to pop them in the chat. And we have a bit of time to answer them. So I was having a little look. We've got a question currently. We have a question from Teresa Nolan saying, are all species equally happy to be laid for the regrowth that you're describing? So that's a really good question.
It's a really good question. So I would say countryside hedges, mostly. Garden hedges, depends what you've put in them. But most of the farm hedges that you've got, the species within them are there in the farm hedges because they actually respond really nicely to this kind of management. There are a couple of exceptions. Beech can be quite tricky. Once a beech has got to a certain maturity, it doesn't really like to regrow from the base. but it's absolutely fine to lay when it's on the younger side of things, just not when it's got whopping and old. Um, but yeah, most of the stems that you find in traditional farmed hedges will absolutely respond like that. Some of them might be more difficult than others. I mean, blackthorn is lovely and bendy, spiky, so you've got to be careful with it, but it's got a nice bit of flex to it. Holly always snaps on me, but it's okay because it will still just grow from the base. If it snaps off when you're trying to lay it, it will still coppice and grow from the bottom instead. So yeah, that there will be differences between how they lay, and at what stage, it is better to do them. But most of the things you'll find in a traditional farmed hedge are there because they respond well to this kind of management.
Brilliant, thank you. And we think we've just had a thumbs up from Teresa, like floated past your face. So I think that means she heard you, and thank you. um, a related question is, what time of year can the hedging work be carried out?
So we do this in the dormant season. So there's a couple of reasons we do that. First of all, we're not going to lay hedges in the bird breeding season because obviously it's an offence to disturb a nesting bird. But also in the dormant season, they've lost all of their leaves and all the sap has been drawn down. So actually, it's much better to do it then. So I would say technically it's September to March, but my preference is when the leaves are off, so when the hedge is in full dormancy.
And we've got, okay, so we've got a question about insects and the margins. So insect surveys I've carried out suggest that the flower-rich margins close to the hedges are the most favoured locations. Do you agree? And how can we encourage them? Could this be part of Hedgerow Heroes?
I do agree. The flower-rich margins are fantastic. I would say that they actually work in a really nice combination. So the earliest flowers and the earliest sort of pollen and nectar resources you get actually come from woody shrub and tree species. So things like willow and blackthorn flower much earlier than most of the flowers in our flowering margins. So flowering margins are fantastic for sort of mid to late season forage, but we need the woody stuff as well for that early season. And again, this is why I think it's really important to have a good mix of species in your hedgerows, because the blackthorn will be one of the first to to flower in the early spring, and the blackthorn pollen is actually really important for creating um, pollinator colonies. So the queen will wake up from hibernation, and it'll be things like blackthorn pollen that it uses to create that first brood of worker bees. And again, yeah, anything that wakes early needs that early season stuff, and that's where the hedgerow comes in. And then later on in the year, that's where the scramblers and the flower rich margin really take the mantle, because they're often having flowers that provide their pollen and nectar slightly later on in the year. So together, they're a match made in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. And I would say this is part of Hedgerow Heroes. We certainly see the verge as part of the hedge. Um, um, so yeah, where we can, hedgerows we encourage landowners to have as much margin as they can. I was actually talking to a landowner just last week who was interested in having 7 meters of verge on the edge of their
7
field, which
meters,
was
wow.
quite, yeah, it was the best I've heard. But yeah, the
Yeah.
margin is absolutely an important part of the
They
overall
they
hedgerow.
often get called, different habitats, but I mean to me they're one and the same. A margin is part of the hedgerow. So margin management is actually a really important part of hedgerow management, because this time of year there's not much in the sort of sticky bits, the woody bit of a hedge. Most of it's at the bottom, at the base of the hedge and in the margins. And to me, margins, it's just an integral part of the hedge.
Yeah, actually, last week we had mice. As we were approaching the hedge to do some laying, we had mice just jumping out of the tusky grass, which was quite nice. And all of the stakes and binders we had delivered, they were like crawling with these mice as I lifted them up, which was really nice. Okay, we've got a different question. So, how could we persuade new housing developments to include existing hedgerow in their plans? So much is ripped out is very sad to see.
It is very sad to see, and this is something that I'm, yeah, that I'm sad to witness. unfortunately, it is really hard, because to me, you can't rip out a hedge and plant it 6 meters in the to the east of it and say that that you've taken one out and put one in, so you're even. What you lose in an old hedge can't be replaced by planting a new one. And I don't necessarily believe that that is entirely reflected in our current planning system. I would love to encourage more sympathetic plans that work around existing habitats like existing hedges. But also, I think we do have to understand that even if we do retain a hedgerow as part of a housing estate, for example, um, we still need to mitigate for the slight reduction that hedgerow will be providing. So even if we keep the hedgerows there, they're likely going to be doing less for wildlife just by being a part of a housing development. So I do think even when we retain those habitat features, we still need to be doing some extra mitigation to make up for the fact that those hedges won't be such good corridors, they won't be such good habitats, just by purely from their proximity to humans.
Yeah, that's a
That
really good
sounded really
point.
depressing about humanity. In general, what I love about hedges, is I don't know about you, Ellie, but when I grew up, the impression that we were given is that whenever humans do anything to wildlife, we make it worse. And I always found that thoroughly depressing because it
Mhm.
makes humanity feel like we're just a negative influence. What I love about hedges is that yes, we depend on them, but they depend on us as well. Their very structure is dependent on us managing them. And if we don't manage them, we lose them. And I just think it's so nice to have a habitat and a focus that actually humans create some positivity towards. Our involvement, our management actually can make this habitat better rather than always making it worse. So I just wanted to counteract my negative statement earlier, but yeah, hedges do need us as well as we need them.
Yeah, no, that's a really lovely and positive view. So it's why I love orchards and meadows as well. Just
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
of that, yeah, it's a really nice way to think about things when we can often feel really negative about ourselves. Um, oh, Lorraine has put in the chat that the Lake District CPRE Cumbria, their Hedgerow Heroes project is actually subtitled Hedges and Edges, focusing on the verges. So yeah, just to point out.
Absolutely. And the Shropshire one, I think, as well.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's a really
Yeah.
nice name. That's more catchy than ours. We also have, it's not a question, but it's a point. Just talking about conservation laying, just saying that which I know you didn't really mention it as much, but the conservation laying can be cheaper. Is there anything you want to say about conservation laying?
Yeah, there's lots to say about different laying techniques, really. So,
Mm.
we've got lots of different types of traditional laying. Laying a hedge in Devon, you do it on a bank, you do it quite close to the bank, it's all down, and you peg it in with what we call crooks, which are basically like giant wooden pegs. In the Midlands, you've got this beautiful Midland bullock style, where you've got this beautiful, and that's, I think, the one that I had pictured, a beautiful clean face and brash on the other side. You've got the South of England side style with brash on both sides. Basically, wherever you go in the countryside, they've got a different way of laying their hedges, and I love that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Because it shows the difference in farming traditions and resources available when these styles were developed. And I love that, one style is designed for mixed farming where you have crops on one side and animals on another, and another style is designed so that you can have animals on both sides. And it reflects the differences across the country of our farming traditions. Um, that said, sometimes our traditional techniques, because they are such fantastic crafts and it takes many, many years to learn how to do them, are quite costly and time heavy. So there is a technique called the conservation style. And again, I believe this was really sort of spearheaded by Nigel Adams, where you still do the pleaching cut, so you still do that sort of sloping cut right at the bottom, and making sure you get that cut right is imperative to making sure it works. But you don't do quite so much of the sort of the staking and the fancy pants twiddly binding at the top. You just secure it a little bit more roughly. take a little bit less brash out as well. And actually, it has the same rejuvenation powers as many of the traditional hedge laying styles, but is a lot faster, and that makes it a lot cheaper. So I think it is really important to be looking at these alternatives, making sure that we look at the alternatives that have been shown to work. So conservation hedge laying is a good one because it still involves that low cut, and making sure that cut is right is crucial to actually making sure that hedge will regrow. But largely, cut it low, remove the heel, lay it uphill, and it'll be fine.
We've actually got a question on a little bit more about funding. I know you talked about funding generally, but we've got a lady saying that can you let me know if there's any? She's saying she really enjoyed your talk, but she's wondering if you know about the per meter funding of hedgerows. She's got business. They do tree planting, mangrove planting, and they'd like to
Mangrove planting.
want to
Wow.
include hedgerows.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
what can you say about that?
Yeah. So the funding's an interesting one. We've got funding from different places. You can find funding from plenty of places to plant hedges. The main one that I think that I know is the capital grants. So that's the one done by DEFRA, the government, and you can get £22.97 to plant a hedge. So that is to cover the cost of the whips, to cover the cost of the spirals, to cover the cost of the mulch, and to cover the cost of the labour of planting it. And if you're going to do it through the government grant scheme, then it's 6 whips per metre, double staggered row, 40 centimetres apart, and you've got to have 2-year-old whips. There are also plenty of other people that will happily support hedgerow creation and hedgerow planting. So people like the Woodland Trust have wonderful free hedgerow kits. Then you can get grants sometimes from a council, sometimes CPRE have some money to put hedgerows in. Different charities will do, and there's plenty of places. I actually the way I work out which pot to use, I probably shouldn't admit to this, is I use ChatGPT because depending on where you are in the country, there'll be different local charities, there'll be different council pots, different pots that might apply. So I normally just type in a postcode and say, what grants are there for hedgerow planting in this postcode? And ChatGPT sort of works out what that might be. So yeah, the main one, as I said, will be the DEFRA one, and that's the hedge planting capital grant. But there are plenty more from different charities, different organisations, different ENGOs. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I love that you use ChatGPT for that. I
No, I
need to
shouldn't
do
admit to
that.
that really.
I really love that. Brilliant. Um, oh yeah, Lorraine's just clarifying that the Hedgerow Heroes is only open to CPRE groups. But I think probably what you were referring to, Megan, was that, like, for example, in CPRE Hampshire, we have a community hedge fund where we
Yes.
give out whips, guards and canes to groups who want hedgerows in their local spots. That's in
Yeah.
Hampshire. But there may be other groups that do that, actually. I can't remember. But yeah, there are lots of different things. Also, I was thinking TCV, the conservation
Yep.
volunteers, they've
Absolutely.
given out whips quite a few years in a
Yep.
row. There's loads.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
sometimes
totally
Flag
right.
have got some going, the Farm Wildlife Advisory Group.
Yeah,
Sometimes Tree Council have got
yeah,
grants on. Yeah, it's. I mean, as I said, there's so many different ones, and some of them are regional, some of them have geographic limits, some of them are time limited. So yeah, I
yeah,
always
yeah,
prefer,
absolutely.
yeah,
ChatGPT's your answer.
ChatGPT.
Lovely. So the same person again, Chloe's asking again, how about as a business to help fund planting per meter? I think that's really what you're saying, that you, as a business, you may be eligible for some of those. Um, is that right, Megan?
Oh, sorry, as a business to help fund other people planting hedges, or as a business to plant hedges yourself?
Oh, I'm seeing. I think yeah,
Oh,
you're
as a
reading the question
donation.
differently.
Yes. Oh,
Ah,
yeah. Well, I would say find a network, find an organization that already has that is already doing the work. So find an organization that has contacts on the ground, that has a contact network of farmers, because largely most of these hedges are going to go on farmed land, and that's how they're going to be managed as well. So I would say if you're wanting to directly support the creation of hedges, find an organisation that already has those links in place and that's already doing the work, and make sure it just gets added to the sort of the total pots there, because I think that's, it's really important that we're not always reinventing the wheel, but that we work together. And luckily, this is something that we do really nicely in the hedgerow world. We do have like a good network of us. There's a group called HedgeLink, where most organizations and charities and NGOs and businesses that have an interest in hedges are a member of HedgeLink. And basically, we all basically work together for the benefit of hedges. So I think it's important to sort of build on and bolster existing networks, because I think that's the most efficient way of getting those plants in the ground, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you may be near a CPRE branch. I don't, if you want to, there are, as Lorraine said, there are 13 CPRE local branches running hedgerow projects, and it may be that they have capacity to increase what they were going to do and do more. For example, in Hampshire, we have over 300 volunteers who help us do planting. So, yeah, see who your local branch is, and they may be able to help deliver if they're already set up to do so. Oh yeah, Lorraine's just put her email in there because she coordinates everyone. Yeah, right, okay.
Sorry,
Any more
just have to
questions?
pop
That's
that
right.
in there. Thank you,
Hello.
Ellie.
No, thank you for chatting in the chat. If there are any other questions, do pop them in the chat. We've got lots of positive and thank yous about your talk, Megan. Yeah. So maybe there aren't more questions. Was there anything you wanted to say, Lorraine, or was that just saying hello?
No, I was just saying thank you very much to Megan, and also if you do want to contact me about Hedgerow Heroes, we are in the middle of the project at the moment, but my email's just there in the chat, lorraine@cpre.org.uk.
Brilliant, lovely. Well, if we don't have more questions, well, I'm just going to say this is the first of our 4-part series. I know Megan talked a bit about the hedgerow management. If you want to hear more about hedgerow management, we've got Nigel Adams, who Megan was mentioning a few times, talking about hedgerow management. In February. But before that, we've got a talk in January, which is from a local CPRE branch, CPRE Sussex. And they're going to be talking what they've been doing in Sussex, which is going to be really interesting. So a local success story by a charity, CPRE Sussex. And then our 4th talk, so I just said them out in a funny order. The 4th talk is going to be a business called Hedge Life. So we've kind of chosen our talks to be a bit different from each other. So Hedge Life do lots of hedge laying and hedge planting, championing re-hedging and rejuvenating hedging in East Anglia. Megan did mention about we need more hedge layers, and that is a brilliant thing that they do. Actually, in partnership with CPRE Hampshire, they have been doing hedge laying traineeships, getting more young people into hedge laying so that we have more people laying hedges, more hedges can be laid, which is brilliant. So all of our talks are going to be really interesting. Thank you very much, Megan. That was a wonderful start to the series. Yeah, please look out for our next talks. But otherwise, have a lovely Christmas, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.